And then along the line, were there significant challenges that I know it wasn't all rosy? Like today, we are sitting here looking back and, excited about the whole journey, but I'm sure there were significant challenges that you had, along the line. Can you highlight a few of them?
Oh, yes. I think, in a sense, some of these challenges are pretty basic and sometimes they still remain. Uh, the Let's say transportation. I mean, we had a decrepit ambulance at the Axim Hospital that served us uh, to load our supplies from the regional medical stores to carry patients back and forth about everything. It just a lot of these things just didn't exist. We had electricity in those days about 4 hours in the evening, and we had a standby generator that broke down quite regularly, and so that was also a challenge. And these are around the working of the houses. Perhaps the greatest one I feel was the understanding and awareness of the population about health issues.
Okay.
That always is the biggest challenge, and I think it still exists today, getting people to understand and appreciate what we can do for them, and maybe ourselves also to understand and appreciate what we could do for them.
Okay. How about in terms of colleagues that you were working with, and was there any challenge with that aspect as a leader?
Yes, it's part of the fabric. I mean, if you didn't have people you didn't like or who didn't like you, I think it wouldn't quite be the same. And if you are a leader in a situation where everybody seems to be comfortable with you, like every decision you took and so on, I would step back and try and ask a few questions about, is there something wrong? Am I being so oppressive that they're unable to tell you things that they ought to tell you? And so, yes, that was there, not only within the staff. There were also the stakeholders within the community in various levels, national level, district level, you name it, international level, that would always have certain interests that might not be immediately visible, and you have to navigate your way through all that. So yes, there were major challenges.
But how would you also describe your leadership style as a person?
Yes, that's an interesting question. And I know people usually expect one answer, that maybe I'm dictatorial, how do they call it, the friendly type and so on. But the way I see it is that I evolved through the system.
Okay.
I was much younger. I don't think I was even 30 when I was heading the hospital in Axim. Things looked simpler to me around solving problems, and I quite easily frustrated when things didn't change. So I was much more brash, much more, should I say, aggressive to people who are not meeting the targets that I thought should easily be met. As I grew through the system and at various levels, I of course, all of us, as you grow older, you get milder.
I was going to actually ask, that is it really true? There's some older, you tend to be calmer, the way you approach.
No question about it. When I look at myself now, people come and say, oh, you are such a soft gentleman and so on. And clearly some of those who know me, I have a colleague who lives in Tamale now. We work in the ministry. Anytime he sees me being gentle and soft, he says, hey, you've changed. And occasionally when the other side also comes out, he says, it's still the same old person. So in a sense, for me, I don't think I had one style of management.
Okay.
It evolved. And I also believe that in certain circumstances, you have to be the hard man. In other circumstances, you have to be the soft diplomatic negotiator. The key thing is getting your results.
Okay. Let's move now to using evidence in public health. I mean, you've contributed significantly to health policies here in Ghana and at the WHO level as well. What role do you think evidence plays significantly in policy?
I think evidence is extremely important, though I'm going to be a bit contrarian. about it. Because I grew up in a system where the evidence didn't quite, should I say, exist. Were evolving as we went along, and nobody had really studied different parts of the system, or the way the studies were done were more about the disease situation, causation, and so on, but not how the population responded and how we can work on that. To some extent, I also felt that the issue of evidence was used to frustrate new ways of thinking.
Okay.
Yes. So, in a way, I thought one of the things we should do is to build evidence as we go along.
Okay.
You start something, you dialogue with friends, you brainstorm about things, you look at various experiences, and then you started something, and make sure you're monitoring and somebody else researching it. I think that was the most important way we used.
Let's move back to the experiences you've had, especially at the global stage. I mean, you've consulted for so many development agencies, UNICEF, the WHO, several of them. How easy is it for you to translate the experiences at this level to the local context?
I think that's the most important skill that a consultant should have. And I also think that the difficulty with that is what has frustrated development moving forward. Because especially if you are unable to do that, then you come with preset ideas. And of course, as soon as you leave, things don't follow. And I'm not saying that wherever I consulted, things worked out smoothly. No, it didn't. One example I had was in Namibia, where I helped develop a management development program. I was really pleased by the fact that when I was leaving, they decided to continue with it. In fact, I was invited a couple of times to go back and see what was happening. They retuned it. The ministry started paying for it themselves. But there are also several places where you go and afterwards, it's all gone. I think the key point I would like to make here is that we know there are all sort of interests, influences, and so on in any health system. And what's particularly important is to understand that. I've also been in countries where after all the discussion, debate, advice, and so on, maybe the last day you're going before you realize that it's all useless because you didn't quite understand the power play behind everything.
Okay. And let's look at some of the situations where you actually had to lead change in very complex situations. Back to Ghana Health Service. I mean, this was something new you were starting to set up. Like, how was the experience like in terms of, were there any specific leadership roles that you think you learned during that process?
I think the big one is the stakeholder analysis and dealing with that. That was an incredible lesson around the Ghana Health Service establishment. From the politicians who had a certain interest, because there was a lot of labor unrest, and the feeling was that the Ghana Health Service, like the Ghana Education Service, would change conditions of service and everybody would be happy thereafter. But which is not quite true. There were the different professions that always fought with each other to some extent, that wanted different interests from the Ghana Health Service and so on. And then there are all those outside local government that said, look, in a decentralized system, we must have the control over the health in the district and things like that. So those were quite critical things. And that's when a tool, I think it's no longer available. It was called polymapping.
Okay.
Developed in Harvard by Michael Reich and others, that I took an interest in. I just downloaded it those days with whatever internet one would have. And what it does is you take the nurses. What would be positive for them in this? What would be negative? Why would they resist this and so on? And it actually creates a certain template for you. And so when you go into negotiations, you have a certain idea of what sort of incentives you'd give people. I found it very interesting. I remember my minister at the time, Commodore Steve Obimpe, and I sat down one time and went through it, and he was so excited by it. He wanted to work with it himself, even at his level as a minister. And it's something that we need to be doing all the time when we are working on these complex issues.
There are some skills that you, as you spoke, became very clear, like negotiation skills. How did you think, as your journey went, you were, built for this in terms of how did you work on being a good negotiator?
I must say, I'm not sure if I'm a good negotiator. There are different circumstances. Sometimes you do quite well. Other times you don't get what you wish to achieve. But I think as you go along the line, and I must emphasize this, you make mistakes. There are situations in which you fall down flat. And so you just rally and try to regain your confidence and your learn lessons from what has happened so that you anticipate the next negotiation. The other side of it is the lessons you learn from these mistakes is how to prepare, having your information available, understanding where the people across the table from you are coming from, what their interests are, and what value they bring to the table, and what distraction they might cause if they are not satisfied with what you're going on. And gradually over the years, you learn to be able to do these things. And even at the peak of your career, it's not always that you are successful. It's important to know that also.
Sometimes, even at this level, sometimes in leadership roles, there is a lot of resistance. I'm sure during these complex situations you found yourself in, there was resistance. I don't know, either from the partners or some of the actors, or how did you really handle resistance as a leader?
Resistance is it's almost a given in any situation of change, or even and sometimes being asked to take over a department is sufficient change to generate significant resistance, and it comes in different forms of people who would say challenge a policy decision. It will come in terms of people dragging their feet around doing something. It will come in shape sometimes from outside your organization, simply getting what should be an administrative process, simple process going, and it's delayed, and they find ways to make sure it's not happening. So I think the first thing is to identify that it is happening and try to see why it is happening.
I mean, you've highlighted the importance of knowing your stuff and you're technically good. But in recent times, in terms of leadership, there's been some highlights on emotional intelligence as well, like focusing on soft skills. Looking at the various roles you played, do you see emotional intelligence coming out clearly?
I think it's you can't do any of these things without utilizing both. For me, having the technical knowledge and understanding is simply the foundation. In order to get it through, then you need the emotional intelligence and so on. And part of it is, again, around what is in it for the person across the table. What will it take away from the person who is working on something else, and trying to minimize those negative effects and enhancing the positive ones for people. And then you get along. And also, it may seem a bit trite, but it's good to be friends with people.
Okay. Let me come back to this. Mostly, we've also been told that as a leader, it's always good to start with having the end in mind. I mean, having the bigger picture in mind. let's go back to Dr. Jovlo in Axim as a medical doctor. Was it really easy for you at that level to picture the end in mind? I mean, looking at how you moved to the global stage.
For myself? Oh, absolutely not. I had no idea where I was going. Certainly not at that stage. It was what? Exim 3 years out of medical school. I went there in 83. Um, uh, I was just trying to do my best in the circumstances. I had some great friends there. For some reason, the chiefs sort of liked me and took me to heart. So I felt a reason to be engaged with them, to try and sort things out with them. I would use my own car for immunization campaigns and things like that, and so on.
So, for me, you are saying you were making the most out of every situation you found yourself.
You have to, yes. It's. I think the way to.
There are no shortcuts.
No, there are no shortcuts. And I'm saying this in terms of that in Exim, I thought I was doing this to become a director in WHO. Absolutely no. I had no idea. At that time, I thought, okay, who knows? I might make a regional director one day. In those days, most regional directors were just approaching retirement. And so at that time, in my mid to late 20s, I was thinking of, okay, that's another 30 years on before I would come and do this thing. So to some extent, I would say that big picture is simply for where you are at the moment.
Okay. And let's put your experiences in Ghana and Rwanda. At a point, you were the WHO country representative for Rwanda. How was the experience in Rwanda different from Ghana?
That's a very interesting experience, and it's I think Rwanda served as one of my greatest lessons. Okay. I remember at my son of the permanent secretary for health was like, oh, I think your experience here has helped you gain the promotion to become a director of health systems in the country, which is true. They do things in a way that's different, and so on. And later became the Minister of Economics, Finance and Economics, and so on. A good friend. But it's a very different system, and it leads me to something a professor from, I think, Harvard said at one of the meetings I was in. He was talking about India. Very intelligent, very well read, these things. And he himself was of Chinese background. Says, but the difference with China is that China will say, we need to do this. And then they don't care too much about the debates and so on. They'll go ahead, do it, make mistakes, correct, and do it. In India, they'll debate things into a stalemate. And very erudite, excellent professors, and have strong views and how this would not work, or it has to work this way, and they won't let it go. And to some extent, that's how I saw the difference between Ghana and in Rwanda. That in Ghana, we had an atmosphere that said everybody speaks, and all the different elements come in and so on, and trying to get something started, and especially taken to the end, can be so difficult with many things coming back and forth. In Rwanda, if they felt it was a good thing to do, they'll get it going.
Okay. Before we move to probably the last part of the discussion, where we are going to look at some of the managerial skills we need as leaders, I want you to highlight on one aspect of leadership we sometimes talk about: diplomacy, the act of diplomacy. And I mean, put it side by side, sometimes being able to say no as a leader. Has it always been easy? Are there any significant times that in your journey you had to step your ground and say, for this one, it's a no?
Well, it's something that comes on a daily basis, and you begin to wonder what it will mean. It is particularly significant if the no has to be to your boss. And it's happened a couple of times that I've had to say, no, this will not work.
Are you blunt with it, or you have to advise our diplomacy?
Of course, you have to have a way to go about it. But I must also say that in my experience, you don't always have to be nice oh, it's all right, let me go behind the scene and let this just first. You won't get anywhere. So at times you do have to be blunt and say, this is not going to work, or I'm not going to create this. You must, of course, be aware that you have the solid backing either of your donor or your source of money or things like that, to be able to say that to people and say, no, this is not the way we conceptualize this, and so
on. Let's look at applying all these principles you've spoken about to the current situation now in our healthcare system. Mostly every visionary leader would have some foundation of strong managerial skills. Management skills. Looking at leaders now in the healthcare space, what do you think are some of the main management skills we need to have to be successful?
It's a very interesting environment I see now, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. I do believe that for all of us in the developing world, we are trying to build new systems. We are trying to grow things along a certain way, create new habits of management, of leadership, and of accountability. So for me, leaders must have all these skills of whether it's politics, it's negotiations, diplomacy. It's simply the basic management skills is important.
Before we wrap up, earlier on we spoke about some of the roles that mentorship plays in our healthcare system. Can you highlight practically now what should I say the older generation actively do? What should the system do to help raise the next generation of healthcare leaders? What are we not doing right?
I think it's an important question. I think that we discussed to some extent earlier the issue of mentorship and the fact that you have to identify a mentee that is appropriate, that is able to move forward. And also the fact that mentoring is not always a natural thing for everybody. So sometimes you have to develop it as a skill. And I told you that in Namibia, we actually trained a certain level of managers and followed them through over months to become mentors, to develop them.
So we should actively train.
Oh, it has to be actively done. It has to be actively done. One of our problems is that once we appoint managers and leaders in the system, we think they are no longer eligible for training. But there's a lot that they can learn also. When you are in an executive position, the way you deal with, let's say, your Ministry of Finance or your distance, are things that you can learn. It's not a classroom that's going to teach you, but at least it creates a certain framework within which you can approach these people and so on. And so for me, the mentorship is critical. And
Dr. Dovlo, before I let you go, one last question. So probably someone has been watching and it's like, wow, he actually went through all that. And how can I become like a Dr. Dovlo or even better in the next 20, 30, 40 years? What's that advice, that last advice you give any, public health specialist watching or anyone who wants to also walk the path that you have walked?
I've said bits and pieces of it in our discussions, but one, try to become a good Dr. Bachman or Dr. Volker or something like that. Not necessarily that man in front of. We all have flaws. That may. But I have a list of things I always tell myself. One, I think we talked a lot about having the technical knowledge of what you do. When I led health systems, I learned to understand pharmacy. I learned to understand laboratory services and what it means and things like that. And have a working knowledge of those. It helps you lead people who work under you and guide them. Secondly, I think your integrity must be impeccable. People will work with you and accept your leadership if they know you are honest, you have integrity, you are fair in how you deal with people and the things you do. It's important. Thirdly, I think it's important to have a certain level of compassion. It wasn't quite so when I was younger. Sometimes we don't know for our staff or the people we work with what is happening at home. Whether there's a disabled child or something like that. And sometimes appreciating that and learning to understand what drives people can make you such a fantastic leader. And being able to understand that and help the people that you lead out of sometimes even personal difficulties and helping them to engage themselves is going to be critically important. There are a few more, but the final one I would say is that sometimes also you have to be ruthless. And
Don't forget that.
absolutely. If somebody or something is an obstacle to the greater good, you can't keep just tolerating it sometimes.
Dr. Adewale, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Being our very first guest on the Leadership Podcast. It's been such an insightful discussion. And I hope that as you watched us, it's pushed you to critically reflect on your own leadership journey and then pick some, tips here and there. And I hope you've learned a lot from this episode. Don't miss the next episode. Signing out, I'm Dr. Grace Bachman. It's bye for now.